welcome back to the SBP podcast, Mobile Filmmaking. I'm Susie Botello, I'm your host, and you're listening to episode 140, and I want to wish you a very happy new year. Well, I picked a really good night to record this episode of our podcast. Our guest is in the UK, and we are here in Southern California, in San Diego, and there's a storm happening right outside right now. So this could get to be a little exciting. Who knows what could happen? It's a mystery what could happen through our conversation with our guest. In any case, let's go ahead and talk to our guest now. Let me introduce you to him. Hey everyone, I am in San Diego, as you already know, but our friend Chris Collier is in the London area close to Brighton, and I wanted to welcome him for the first time to the show. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yes, of course. Chris, I wanted to share with our listeners that we bring onto this show a lot of filmmakers, and you're a filmmaker, but not one that is very typical in our show. You are one of my favorite genre filmmakers, documentaries, and I'm really happy and excited to share your stories and share some tips and how you do it with our listeners. And I think having someone like you on is ideal. You made a documentary which is really, really well done. And I was fortunate enough to watch it. It's called FrightFest, Beneath the Dark Heart of Cinema. And I wanted you to share a little bit, just a little bit about the synopsis of that documentary before I ask you some, a little more about you, the person behind that film.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So the film itself is a documentary about a horror film festival in London that takes place every year called FrightFest. It's been going on for about 20 years. However, it's also really underneath about a subject that recurs in a number of the films that I make, which is about building a family outside of your family. So that's the real underlying theme of the film. So it looks through the history of the film, but underneath it, you've got the relationship between the people who attend the film and their relationship with each other's and the people who run the festival. So it's kind of a personal story, which I think actually, as you say, does fit well with what you do, because I think using a mobile phone to make a documentary, you could actually tell some very personal stories, which are the kind of areas that I like to work in.
Share a little bit about you before we go all in on this documentary film that you made, and use that as a really nice platform for documentary filmmaking.
So
where did you get started to want to go into film?
So I started out as a musician, and I wrote some music for film a long time ago, and then became a sound designer. And then I progressed from that to doing some sound editing on films, and then just built up relationships basically by working in various sound roles. And then I started to work as a producer, and I produced a large number of DVD extras, trailers, promotional material for films. Then gradually I began to, as a lot of producers do, decide that they want to direct. So I began to direct some of the DVD extras. Also did some work on my own with an artist, a painter. So we did some experimental films that played as parts of exhibitions and galleries in the UK.
That's interesting.
And then, yeah, so the other things that I've done have been sort of quite experimental cinema, and then the other side of that has been this documentary work, which really has been films about film. And then so this idea came along for this, and I thought it was time to make a feature-length documentary. And at that point, I'd really decided that documentary films were the films that I wanted to make, and I wanted to move at that point into making feature-length ones.
Now, I know that for people who are listening, our friends, that we talk about, making films with smartphones, and we're going to definitely touch on that here. But you shot this documentary with a traditional film camera, movie camera, cinema camera.
Yeah, so actually a variety of different cameras, because we started shooting on a Blackmagic camera, a 4K Blackmagic camera, and then later on we moved over to a Sony camera. I worked on a film doing the sound with a guy called Philip Bloom, who is one of the sort of pioneers of DSLR filmmaking, and I watched him on this film, which I'd agreed to record the sound with for no money, so that I could be on the set and watch him work. And he used Sony cameras, so at that point we switched to Sony cameras. So the second, it's all interspersed with each other, but the second part of the shooting, which was over quite a long period, was shot on Sony cameras, which meant that we were able to shoot in the dark in the cinema, which was something that was very difficult with the Blackmagic cameras, because I don't know what they do now, but they didn't react at the time particularly well to low light, whereas the Sony was really good in low light. And from that point forward, I've used Sony cameras. However, a lot of the footage that's archival was shot on all kinds of things. And there's actually a piece of footage quite early on that we gathered, which we don't actually know what it was shot on, but we think it might have been shot on something like a Nokia 3310. It's incredibly low resolution, but it was the only place that somebody had filmed Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman, and it was a piece of footage that we needed to use. So we used it, and I don't think as you watch the film, by the point it plays, you're into the film and the story, I hope, and you don't notice that this is something that is, one of the first mobile phones that would have shot video.
And what was it called again? A few
seconds of it. I think it was probably one of the first Nokia, mobile phones that did video. Yeah. And yeah, there's various other bits. There are a few other pieces that we gather from people where something had happened. There wasn't a camera there, but somebody had captured it on a mobile phone, and we'd used that. So it's multiple formats all throughout the film. We shot the interviews at 4K, but the film, the final DCP was a 1080p. So we obviously had a bit of latitude with the 4K, but it meant that we could use lower resolution footage that people had shot over a long period of time on a whole host of cameras.
Yeah, I working myself also as a media manager on various promotional and documentary films, videos. I call them videos. I mean, for me, and we would get things. I remember having some 8mm film that we had to get. We sent it out to a lab to get transferred into digital form. But I had to digitize. I mean, I had to find an old high 8 camera from the early 90s in order to digitize into Final Cut Pro and to digitize the high 8 footage and scan a lot of photographs to do the Ken Burns effect, for motion to bring into video. And those are just things that happen a lot in documentary filmmaking because it's just so, it's still in motion. It's very highly based on the story. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was, when you write a screenplay, a script for a film, it's always fluid. There's always a little change here and there, but it's pretty set. And with documentary filmmaking, it's super fluid. And a lot of times you're writing it as you go because of the discovery, factor. Can you share? I know you shot this in around 2018. Is that or when it was finished?
Yeah, that's when it was finished. Yeah, it took 2 years. So
okay.
Yeah, and it was finished in 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other difference. Unless you're making Lord of the Rings or something, that it doesn't normally take that long to make a feature film. But a documentary, there's so much. How should I call it? The production meetings are constant throughout the process, right?
Yeah.
Like, where do you go next? Who are you going to talk to? Your protagonists in your film were the directors of the film festival, and those were the key people that you were interviewing, right?
Yeah.
And then they turned you on to other people, and then you had to go back and verify things and things like that, right?
Yeah. So I knew them before. I'd worked shooting, actually a bit like the work that you do. So I'd gone in as freelance and shot all of the media output for their festival for a few years. So I knew them, and I'd witnessed some of their fallings out and things that had happened during festivals, which is something that you get to see a bit of in the film. And so I knew how they were, and I knew from the festival that there was this sort of family feel around how the fans behaved in their interactions with the festival. So if I just tell you the story about how it came about, because we were previously working on this other documentary, which I won't talk about because it may be that at some point we could start it again. But it was a film about a person, and we'd got part way into the film and shooting just interview sections, which is how I'd normally start shooting something. And it became apparent that they'd been talking to somebody else about making a film about them, and that other person hadn't shot anything. But I spoke to them, and they told me the film that they envisaged, and actually I thought that they had a closer, better take. And I said, okay, well, we'll stop, which probably in hindsight was a mistake because their film never emerged. But we went from one day shooting a film to the next day not having a film, and I knew the guys from FrightFest, and I was literally just on YouTube, being of a certain age, watching old documentaries about Nirvana and punk and things like that. And one of the organisers, Alan, was very involved in the UK punk scene. He worked in Vivienne Westwood's shop, and he appeared in one of these documentaries. And I just thought to myself, there's a lot more to these people than people know about. And that was just the starting point. So then get into the writing process, which you were talking about. With that one, because the three of them, there's quite a lot of information about. They appear in books and things. I was able to write the basis of the script. But obviously, interviewing people who go to the film festival, there is no biography about. You find that you do have to shoot very long interviews and then almost write it with those interviews. But just say that obviously I had the idea, and then I pitched it to those four guys, and I said, look, what I need from you is to be able to interview you individually for 6 hours, and that at the other end you're not going to get any final cut over this. I'm going to make the film I'm going to make. And fortunately they agreed to that, because had they wanted an individual final cut on the film, then or to agree how the film represented the festival, then you never would have got anything agreed. But fortunately they were fine with it anyway. So
there is something about documentary filmmaking, which is the ethics of it too, which is it becomes a promotional documentary if they would have had a good hand in it, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you as the filmmaker don't want to put words in their mouth. Want to leave them alone when they're sharing their story, during the interviews.
That's right. Yeah. So you're exactly right. You want to make sure that you've got enough freedom to tell the story without somebody trying to manipulate it. But then by the same measure, you want to make sure that you're not manipulating that story, and that you can get to the truth of it. But also you were talking about your kind of the moral responsibility. There is a responsibility. If somebody says something and that they didn't mean to say that, or they'll be hurt by that.
Yeah.
You do have a responsibility. Now, it may be that you choose to use that, and you have to weigh that up. If it was somebody, for example, a politician who was a public figure, who that's what they did and that's what they were measured by, you might choose to use that more readily than you would a person who has just agreed to be in a documentary and has just said the wrong thing. So yes, you have a responsibility to just think about what it is that you're putting out there, particularly when you're putting people who aren't normally in the public eye out there, people who are not used to being interviewed as well.
Yeah, because they're not experts at being interviewed as well. For example, victims are one that can say things that you realize later, if I share this, it could put them in danger, right? Or people could it would turn the documentary into the story into a different direction, and not have to fulfill by filling up the holes and things like that. So, and that happens with documentaries. Did that happen with this at all? At any point where you found out things while you were interviewing people and said, maybe that's not the most ethical question for you to answer, but without sharing details, there were some things you were going this way and you thought, light bulb comes up, and now you want to wonder this way a little bit more than you thought you would.
there were some things that were personal to some people involved in the festival that we started to explore, but we did get to a point where there were some bits that we thought actually using this would be actually impinging a little bit on someone's personal life, and even though they were happy with it, we didn't feel comfortable with it, and we didn't need it. Often, also, you'll find that there are whole areas that you start to explore, but you just don't actually have time to explore them, and then it's weighing off which bits you're going to use, because you don't really have the same amount of time that you had if you were making Lord of the Rings to include every little bit. You've really got to get to the truth of the story, and that's it, and try and keep it. And I always try to keep things at a very sensible length.
Yeah, it's almost like you're thinking. I mean, it's like an editor where you're constantly throwing things out. I mean, you probably shot 100% of all the footage, and then maybe 10% made it into the documentary, right?
Yeah, the shooting ratio with the documentary is obviously much higher than a normal film. I mean, if you think the film's just under 90 minutes, but each of those, so the 4 organisers got shot for 6 hours each. Most of the people who appear in it, and some people appear in it for about 10 seconds, they would have been interviewed for several hours. There are all of the archival footage was shot over a sort of 10-year period, and there are hundreds and hundreds of hours of that. So it is really an editing job. A lot of the actual writing, I have an idea of the structure that I want the film to follow and how I want the story to unfold, but you discover a lot of that in the editing. So if I give you an example, the film that we're just finishing now, it's a film that's called Title Year, Director, Place, and it's about a man who's been making a list of every film in the world since the late 1960s, and he actually has the Guinness Book of Records record for the largest film database. So IMDb don't have the record. This guy has the record, and he's one man on his own.
Wow.
However, there's absolutely no information about him out there. So everything came from the interviews, and I interviewed him for several days. Well, that's going to come down to, a 90-minute documentary. And that has to be made in the editing room. So, you start with talking about how someone's life started, and you talk about their life. And I know that I obviously want to talk about his film database, but I have no idea what he's going to say to me about the rest of his life. And so it's about, when you get those key points, recognizing them, so that when you go back to do the second interview, you've got another set of questions. So you're writing it as you discover. So that's the tricky thing. And that'll be the case, I guess, for people making documentaries that are personal, that are not about famous people, where there isn't a lot of background information. Is that you are going to discover things, and you are going to you need to make a note of that and go, right, well, that's an area I'm going to explore next time, and then continue on through until you think you've covered everything. It
is so exciting to. I'm actually fiddling with my hands here, going, gosh, I'm getting nostalgic, because it is all discovery. It's very challenging. You interview somebody, you don't, like you said, you don't know what they're going to say. And then you listen. You got to sit down with a set of headphones and play everything back. You don't really have, other than someone talking, right? You've got to fill up the video. The script for a documentary, speaking to our friends on the other side here, is usually a 2-column script. and you have your audio on one side, and then you have audio, meaning the narration, the story, the narrator, the voice of the people, everything you hear pretty much. And then on the other side, you have all the visuals, everything you're going to see. And it's really cool because you get to see as you're reading along, and also the timing of it, you have to fill up that space. You don't want to just have the audio and the person on camera on the screen the entire time. So you're sort of listening to it, but in your head while you're listening to it, right, you're plotting the visuals you're going to need. So when you go back for the next set of questions, you're also asking them for material for that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, with obviously with the FrightFest documentary, there was I could make a traditional script like that. So you have an idea of so you write the script. This is the bit that I think people often don't realize, is that you understand where you understand what the story is. You've got to ask the question that gives them the words that you don't know what the words are yet, but they're the words that are going to fit to write the bit that's in the script.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't ask the question, you don't have the story. So you've got to have a set of questions that unlocks the story. And then obviously you can have an idea of visuals as you write that, because you've written the story in advance. Something like this other film where the story is so vague. It's a man did this, why did he do it, and what's he doing now, and what else can we discover about him? That all there is a set of questions. There isn't anything really visual. The visual part comes as we put a skeleton together in the editing software and start to think about the visual elements, and then I'll go back and maybe shot some scenes. And with this one, a little like the other one, we did a little bit of reconstruction before, but this one's got a lot more reconstruction in it. There's stuff that's shot rather like a narrative film, so go back, reshoot, in a lit scene, some things that happened. You don't have to follow those rules of you need to know in advance exactly what you're going to get, I guess is what I'm saying. You might find you can do that if you know the story, but it may be if you're really discovering the story, you just need to get the person to tell you the story first.
Yeah, you sort of have an outline and a skeleton type of a script. One of the things that I noticed on your documentary for the FrightFest, you and now it makes sense because I wanted to comment on this to you. You have some very artistic shots that when you're shooting B-roll, it can be, a lot of people think of B-roll as boring. You're panning and tilting, you're covering this, you're doing wide shots, you're doing close-ups, you do multiple takes of the same subject, right? So that you can experiment later in the editing room. But the thing is, that's really neat, and now I get where it came from with you, with your experimental filmmaking and artistic filmmaking. Some of the B-roll shots that you shot, that you could tell they weren't just footage that was already shot, that you shot that, was really interesting. The juxtaposition of those shots with what we were listening to was really, really cool. So I just wanted to tell you that I loved those. They didn't go by me like it was, it was great. You did a really good job with that. And I think it's attractive to, people who are listening who maybe, are more interested in narrative film, cinematographers and things like that you could do some really interesting things with B-roll. Very artistic.
Yeah, I think depending on the kind of documentary that you're making, but if you are shooting something where you are going to cover all of the documentary with other footage, so you're not going to shoot show very much talking heads. Really, the B-roll really becomes A-roll. It needs to be something interesting to look at, rather than just being what you might see. A lot of low-budget documentaries that maybe you see on. We've got a TV channel called Channel 5, and they show these sort of very, very cheaply made documentaries that were obviously made very, very quickly, and they they'll say something and then they'll show you a picture of it, and that's it. And it's just a collection of pictures that match what the person's just said. Whereas actually, if there's a more interesting sequence that does something that fits over the whole piece of the narrative that the person's talking about at that time, then it's a lot more interesting. If you think about, I think something that's influential is some films, like there are great filmmakers like Errol Morris, and you think about the Thin Blue Line, where he reconstructed everything, and it's really shot like a feature film. So it'll be talking about, be talking about the thing, and then there's
one of the really things that you also do, which I enjoy doing whenever I'm working on one, is those little spaces in between, right?
Yeah.
Where you create some maybe musical montages, or just little breakaways, which are, I don't remember what the word is now.
Yeah.
Transitions, right?
Yeah.
Segues from one section to the next. Those can be very experimental and really fun to do as well. And you did a lot of that during this, which is how you keep the viewer engaged in the story in a real entertaining way.
Yeah, I think it's important that you there are those gaps, and rather than it just being a transition to another scene, that there is just a moment to breathe. Otherwise, it becomes a lot of people talking, and you get sort of 90 minutes of people talking at you. Whereas if those transitions are a transition between the two, and they're almost like chapters often in a documentary. If you can make a brief moment just for people to go, okay, well, that's what I just saw. That subject's kind of finished. And there's a moment just to breathe before you move into the next part. Yeah, otherwise, when you first put one of these cuts together and it doesn't really have all of that sort of stuff in it, it's an awful lot of talking. Particularly when we start out, I work with the same editor every time, a guy called Craig Ennis, who's fantastic at understanding what I want, and we normally end up with something. Probably the first thing we'll ever watch will probably be about 3 hours, and it would just be people talking, and with an hour and a half too much talking in it. So it's a case of getting it down to a sensible length, getting rid of all of the things that you thought you wanted, and some things that you'd really like to have but there isn't time to, and then putting in those moments just to let the story breathe a bit.
You have scenes in this documentary that involved the community, really, the fans. And you created some of those moments with them as they were enjoying the show, the moments when they were in the theater, and when they were outside the theater, arriving to the theater, talking with each other and connecting with each other. And even though it had been said, people connect, people this and people that, but to actually show those things together in the way that you did it, I think really drove the point home. There's always an element in a documentary that just captures you. And it could be a 2-hour documentary. I think yours wasn't it over 2 hours? I mean, it just...
No. It's about 90 minutes. So I try to get things just under 90 minutes. And and I think it's about 88 minutes, but it's yeah.
Well, it's the way you structure the story. See, that's the other thing about a documentary. You have so many options on how you're going to structure the story. You were just talking about laying everything out on the timeline, right? Mm. And you just have all the words and what people are saying, but now you have to sort of play with that, where to put each section here and there, how to break it up, how to insert different things that you don't even know you need yet until you do that. Explain that process, because it's very, very creative.
I guess with the FrightFest film, it was easier to put a first layer down to the structure. So this is I guess this is the difference between making a short documentary and a feature length one. If you're making a feature length film of any kind, really, you need more than one plot. So you've got the A plot, which runs through this, which is there's a film festival that started here, and we're here at the end. Right. So we can break that down into the cinemas that it happened at. So you get those chapters: the beginning, then it was here, then it was here, then it was here. But within that, you've got the story of the individual people, or events that happened, or something that happened at the festival, or a point in the festival where a thing happened. Now, there'll be things within that where you could put them at any point, and it's finding the right point to put them in, those bits from the B plot. Of course, you could do it in a completely different order. You could put, and we did a little bit in that we put the end at the beginning, mm-hmm. and sort of reflected back on it at the end, because we wanted to start with the closing of a cinema. Yeah, and I would just say about that bit at the beginning, just because you mentioned the artistic sensibility. There's a piece at the beginning where over black you can hear them arguing, and then there's them on stage, and then at the end the camera goes all shaky, wobbly, all around everywhere through a tunnel, and you get the opening credits. Actually, how that was captured was that, oddly, and this is an incredible coincidence, on that day, so all these years before we were ever thinking we would shoot a documentary, I worked for them, and I'd got a crew there filming that closing of the festival. And the crew have worked really, really hard, and we'd got a young camera person, and I said to them, you know what, you're really tired, you can go home. I'll just stand on this camera and film this angle. It's the last thing we're filming. You're free to go and do whatever. So they went, so that angle was shot by me, 3 years before we knew there was a film festival. The bit of them arguing was where someone had started the sound recording in the projection booth well before they needed to. So I found that piece of audio when I just went through all this archive. And then I found this bit of footage where what happened was it got to the end and it was pitch black in the cinema. I wasn't familiar with the camera. I didn't know how to switch it off. So I just picked it up and walked out the cinema with it.
Nice.
And that's the bit of footage that we use at the start of the film, because actually what happens is you see in pitch black where we whack the gain up, you can see people's faces as the film's about to begin, and you can then we go through a tunnel and out of the cinema, and you see all the lights. It makes quite a nice opening for the film, but it was completely pot luck.
Yeah, it creates a little bit of suspense, like what's coming up next.
Yeah, so that was, I don't know how I got to that, but
well, the artistic, the structuring of that, on the storytelling part. There's a quote that I wanted to read that's on your website. And by the way, it's chriscollier.co.uk. And it says, witnessing stories, finding the extraordinary from within the everyday, and sharing the learning. And I love it. I really love that quote. And I'm going to
That's
actually
something.
make sure that it goes in the notes for everybody to read it again.
Oh, thank you. I think that's something. Well, I know that's something. Over the last couple of years, I started to work on defining the purpose behind the work, and then in the last year, I'd really got it nailed down. And I would really encourage any filmmaker, no matter what they are working on, to really define the purpose of their work. And it took a long time. It's not something you sit down and think, and I just wrote that down. There's a lot of notes below how I arrived at that. So, you think about what it is that you do. And what I try to do when I interview somebody is be almost like a mindful witness to their life, because I make stories about people, really. And I'm trying to witness their life rather than be intrusive into their life. So that was kind of the witness part. The extraordinary within the everyday was trying to find that language that explain where you can, get exactly what I mean. Took a long time, because it is about saying that everybody, if I sat down with anyone somewhere within that conversation, there'd be something extraordinary. I refuse to believe that there is a bit of extraordinary in everybody. And it's just finding that piece of extraordinary, which might be a lot, actually probably is a lot. It's just taking the time to sit down with somebody. And then the sharing what I've learned part really is about making the films, but also in a lot of the work that I've done, I've always tried to use very new filmmakers who are, maybe they're just qualified as a director or a sound recordist or whatever, and maybe they're struggling to find work. And if I was able to find a place on a crew for people who are trying to get a start or trying to learn a way in, and a lot of those people have come through local colleges, because there are some local colleges that we have here where you can get into the course perhaps without having a particularly academic background. So it might be that you're really practical and that you just need an opportunity. And so it's not like going to university to become a director. This is like getting into a local small course that will give you some basic media skills. But actually, if I can help somebody get some practical skills, then that's also been really important as well. So it's about sharing the learning through making the films themselves, but also about sharing that and learning with other people.
And you're doing a little bit of that in this episode of our podcast, sharing this with everybody. Now, let me ask you.
Well, you're doing a lot of it, actually. I just wanted to say, actually, because I'd listened to a few of the podcasts. When I became aware of it, I went through and it was interesting to hear the community that is there around mobile filmmaking, and there's all of the different techniques that I could hear about that I wasn't aware of, and all of the different bits of equipment and software, various bits of software that people are using, and there really is a community there. And I think what you're doing really is helping that community share each other's learning, which is a really great thing.
Well, thank you, but you know what it is structuring their story. If you could take the millions of hours, your episode 140, and they're usually over an hour long. But if you could take them all and string them along in one story that gets to share the story of, the progress that is happening with mobile filmmaking. This is a great segue. The real question that I want to ask you now that we've gone through all this, the one that I think our listeners are really eager to hear. Now, you worked with audio. When you recorded the audio for this particular documentary, you did that externally, right?
Yeah.
And because it's outstanding. And that's really, really important that even though the audio in the normal, in the normal.
Mm.
In the other videos and things like that that you have no control over because they were captured, by other people. But that the interviews and the things that you are capturing with your cameras are good, and you can hear the difference, but it adds quality to to your film. But the big question is, could you have shot this today, considering what the capabilities of take a Sony or in the iPhone, the capabilities of the smartphone cameras today with the apps and so forth? Could you have shot this entire, just replaced the Blackmagic and the Sony camera with a smartphone?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of it you could definitely have shot with a smartphone, and I think that would go for any documentary. I think a smartphone is an ideal thing for somebody to tell a story with. The audio part is the tricky part, I think.
That would have to be external.
So that's good to hear that the community is using external, because I think that's always going to be the thing that a mobile phone is going to struggle to capture, is because you're going to get that sound of the room. But the cost of external equipment has come down so far now. The main thing is just finding something that's got quiet preamps on it, and most of those sort of Tascam recorders that are, I don't know what they are in the US, but they're like £150 or something here. They've got really quiet preamps if somebody's looking to use something on a budget.
Yeah.
And the microphones have come down in cost as well. And even Sennheiser made a sort of industry standard lab mic that everybody used, but now they make these portable sort of new ones. I can't remember what they're called, but they're a lot cheaper. So the equipment's there. But the thing I would also suggest people get is there's some piece of software called Isotope RX, which there are some. It is very expensive, but there are some budget versions of it that they make. I think there's one that's called Essentials, and it is without doubt the best noise reduction software that you can get.
You might have to send us a link for that so that I can add it.
Yeah, I will do. It's I did the sound restoration on a film about the Blair Witch Project.
Ooh, that's one of my really awesome.
Yeah, it was. So the filmmaker had all of the footage that they'd shot, so it's made entirely out of the I guess it's the filmmaker's cameras behind the scenes, so you can see the action happening over there, and they're shooting it on their I guess they were hi8 cameras. And yeah, it was an incredible film. I mean, the film has never come out because there was an issue with the rights, because Blair Witch has gone through so many different companies' hands, and nobody was really clear on who had the rights to the behind the scenes footage. But it was an incredible film, but it had absolutely terrible audio on it. And I worked through all of that using the full version of RX, and there were bits where it could remove so much noise. And the important thing is, without changing the sound of people's voices, that there was a bit where they were driving in a car, and actually the filmmaker couldn't hear it as he put it together, but Nirvana was playing on the radio, and you could suddenly hear the music from underneath all of this noise. There were also bits of audio that you discovered somebody said something, but it was hidden under this really, really loud sort of hum and various other things. But yeah, so it's great software if you do capture something that you really want to use, and you just use the microphones on the phone, something like that. They do it comes with some plugins that you can just drop into Final Cut or Premiere, and it will work on it with very, very few settings for you to adjust as well, which is just for the basic dialogue reconstruction.
Now, with the camera on the phone, you know, one thing is to film actors who are used to being in front of cameras, but when you're interviewing regular people with no training whatsoever, I don't know of anyone from the age of 2 weeks old to 105 or 107 or however long people live now who has not been in front of a smartphone camera, who could probably feel more comfortable and more open for interviews. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. There's definitely a barrier that you have to get through, often with people who've never sat in front of a camera before. And obviously it's not just the camera as well. And it's that whole process of you setting everything up. They get an opportunity to become nervous by, lights going up and cameras coming out, and generally I would shoot with 2 cameras, and then you've got all the audio equipment, and then they're getting mic'd up. If you have got a particularly nervous person that you're going to interview, if you can just put a microphone, maybe a good quality boom mic, close but overhead, and just shoot them on an iPhone, you could, or whatever phone you're using, right. you could get something pretty immediately. They'd be I'm assuming they would be much calmer, much quicker. You do have to work through that. I mean, you can do it with the cameras, obviously, but there is a process of getting somebody relaxed to being filmed.
I don't know if this has happened to you, if you've ever recorded victims and interviewed victims. This one documentary that I started working on, victims of drunk driving, someone who lost her husband to a drunk driver. And she was sitting, and we were prepping things up. We had the lights, and we were setting up the lavalier microphones, and I was behind the camera, and it was on a tripod, and all these things. And she said that the interview felt like therapy for her because she had already been through counseling and everything as a victim, but it all came back like, and she said it just felt like someone really cares, to hear my story. It's almost therapeutic.
Yeah, I think that there are lots of examples of films that have been made about people like that. I think that's really good to hear that was the response, and it shows you did a really good job with the victim, because it's obvious from the filmmaker's perspective, you would have been incredibly nervous about that conversation as well, because I must have asked people hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of questions, but if I know that I'm going to sit down with somebody and I've got to ask them a difficult question, it doesn't make it any easier, because their response, I have an idea maybe of what I think their response is, but I don't know until I've asked the question. So it must be very difficult for you to sit down with the victim as well, to just understand where the line is, how I should approach this, and then you obviously feel your way into the difficult questions.
You almost have to have a bit of people feeling comfortable talking to you, and also I think that again it just I have a friend who made a documentary about child abuse, and the center that forgot what it's called, Child Protection Services or whatever it's called, and she said that she put a call for victims of that system, and she says you wouldn't believe the hundreds of people that wanted to be interviewed and wanted to be a part of this documentary, and she only used a few of those people, but she couldn't deny the people that wanted to sit down and share their story. And she was saying the same thing, because we were talking about mine, that it's kind of therapeutic for them. It does something which no one else has done for them. Not everybody attracts a news station, you know what I'm saying, and shares their story. And sometimes they just need that in a bit like closure in some way, or feel like whatever happened to them helps somebody else. But anyways, your documentary was not like that. So
no, I think no, it was. I also trying to in a way be the antidote to a lot of similar documentaries, which are always looking at the darker side of this or the darker side of that. And actually, I wanted to make something that was uplifting.
Yeah.
So rather than, I've seen things about other festivals that are just, it's all about what went wrong or what's, and it's, yeah,
it was really, really, really entertaining. And the thing is that the people that you interviewed, the fans and everything, they were, it was like characters in a film. Like you want to hear more from them, and you get to hear about them. You get to hear more of their stories throughout, like characters in a narrative film, practically. So you did a really good job. I mean, if I could, I'd give you an award. So you might you might have to make your next documentary on a phone. Yeah. Give that a shot. Pun intended.
Yeah. So, I mean, just with those, I was lucky that I got a production manager who did a lot of work going through all the fans. So they didn't audition. It wasn't that bad, but we did get a sense of who everybody was, and making sure that we had a good balance of people who just come to the festival, people who've been going a long time, and people who came as a family, and people, there's a guy who comes with his dad, who are both doctors, which obviously if we meet them, you go, well, we're definitely interviewing them. That's very impressive. I just wanted to, because I got lost in talking about the purpose thing, because I think it's actually really useful for filmmakers. It really helped me. Was if you can define your purpose down into like a sentence like that, when you're partway through making a film, particularly a feature film, and you're completely lost, if you can just come back to go, this, if you can say to somebody, this is what I do, and you can define it in a sentence that's really clear, it makes everything much easier.
Yeah.
Because, you can really get wrapped up in worrying about all of the different things. And actually, it affects people working on a lower budget much more, because you're making a lot more decisions. You haven't got somebody making decisions about this particular piece of sound equipment or whatever, or that you're making the decisions about all of the pieces of equipment, all of the stuff. And filmmakers who are shooting on a mobile phone, taking it back, editing it, doing the sound, they've got all of that, and they've got all of the external influences of how the film industry works for them to go, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Should I be doing that? Whereas if they can just really clearly go, this is what my purpose is, this is what I do, they can have the confidence to just make their film. Yeah.
That's inspiring.
So I just wanted to kind of get the point across of why it's a really good idea just to define that, so I can go, this is what I do this, that's what comes out the other end, and then I can kind of forget about the external influences of, I've seen some amazing films this year. I went to the London Film Festival and saw some incredible documentaries, and the danger is you start to think, I've just seen the best. Some of those films will be the best documentaries that were made this year, and you start to think, and you compare your work to theirs, and if you just go, no, that's their work and this is mine.
It really is about the story, Chris.
Yeah.
the story you want to tell.
Absolutely.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the whole thing, especially in documentary filmmaking, because, you know, like when I started talking about this, how fluid the story is from the get-go. You have the bare bones, and now you're just adding the meat. You're sort of reversing the process of it. And it can, when you're listening to all the stories and everything, and you're thinking, oh, I could go here, I could talk about that, I could structure it this way, I could structure it the other way. And it's like, well, just make sure that you have the entire story. That really is what it is.
Yeah.
That you've covered your story, and then you can play with that, right?
Absolutely.
Chris, is there anything else that I'm missing that we haven't shared?
I think just on the mobile, on shooting with the mobile, I think potentially it's the documentary is the best genre to get into film with a mobile phone or on a low budget, in that you're not reliant on all of the other elements that are required to make a film. You can be you on your own. You can even be telling your own story, and with a mobile phone, you can tell it in an incredibly personal way. And you can tell the small personal stories that maybe haven't been told yet. So I think it's incredible that they've got to a point now, and the quality of the video on a mobile phone is incredible quality. And I've heard you talk about some of the films that have been released, and I know, well, they've been being released for some time, and some of the mobile phones at the time initially were just HD, but I know now some of the mobile phones shoot at incredibly high resolutions, and have got a whole host of apps and things to make the footage give you more control over the footage. I think there's never been a better time to just go, there's that story of that guy over there, or what about my story? Maybe I'll just tell that, and just pick up your phone and start doing it.
Yeah, and talk about really owning your story. If you're making a documentary and you really want to own that story and not have any influence from you do when someone is funding the story, right? Yeah. That is the best way to do it. It's a dream come true for a documentary filmmaker, which is, again, I'm twisting your arm. You should do it. So, all right. Well, unless there's anything else that we haven't shared, guys, I'm going to be writing. I sometimes a lot of times forget to mention, I'm going to be writing and sharing an article on our Medium publication for smartphone filmmaking. We're going to put the link in the notes as well. And there's also the trailer. I'm going to share the link to the trailer on the notes. But in the article, we'll share some photos and those links as well. So go and click on that. If you're driving, don't. but it's there. Chris, you are on social media, and we're going to put all those links there as well. We're going to put everything, Mastodon, which is, believe it or not, how Chris and I bumped into each other. And then you're also on Twitter, LinkedIn, and then we'll also share your website. Chris, thank you so much for sharing everything you know and all the industry secrets with our listeners. Really appreciate that a lot. And
no problem at all.
Yeah. So if you want to say goodbye to our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks very much for inviting me on. It was strange to meet on Mastodon. I just opened an account.
Me too.
Yeah. No, thanks very much for inviting me on. It's been really interesting talking to you, and it's been really interesting finding out about the community as well. Thank you.